Grab your coffee and get ready because today we're getting on a roller coaster ride of a case. The mysterious death of Thelma Todd may be officially closed, but there are still many skeptics out there that keep the chatter alive about what might have actually happened. So let's take to the notes. Thelma Alice Todd was born July 29th, 1906, in Massachusetts. In case you were wondering, that does make her a Leo. Her father, John, was from Ireland, and her mother, Alice, was from Canada. She did have one sibling, a brother, though he died in an accident in 1910 when she was just 4 years old. Thelma was very beautiful and recognized for such. She began beauty pageants when she was a teenager and even won Miss Massachusetts in 1925 when she was 19 years old. But she was more than just a pretty face. She was known by her friends as a friendly, bright, and determined person who was pursuing a career in teaching. This was until she was discovered by a talent scout who would help her kick off her career with Paramount Pictures. Very quickly, she earned many supporting roles and began building her credits. So keep in mind this was during the time of silent films. She knew she loved being on camera, but it was clear that she wanted to showcase more of her acting skills and become possibly an actress in talkies when those started to become popular. Hal Roach was a big time producer who saw that she had these talents and wanted to help her land roles with other giant comedy stars of the time. After proving herself with these stars, Roach decided it was time for Thelma to get her own show, which was a full length comedy short. According to Wikipedia, these shorts usually portrayed her as, quote, a level headed working girl doing her best to remain poised and charming despite numerous problems and her ditzy sidekick's embarrassing antics. And we often see in television and film, even today, that doing shows like this can lead to more serious roles. And that's what happened in this case as well. She started landing starring roles in Corsair, which was directed by the famous Roland West, who would eventually go on to date Thelma. Between these two things, she became very well known and highly sought after for Hollywood comedies and dramas. So much so that she actually had 120 credits to her name throughout her career. But as I said, she was more than just a pretty face that had some acting talent. She also had a hunger for more and wanted to be a successful businesswoman. That's why in 1934 she opened her first business. It was a restaurant called Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, and the building still exists today. It was a very popular site during its time. For anyone living in the Los Angeles area that wants to visit, it's located at 17575 Pacific Coast Highway in Pacific Palisades. And while she ran this restaurant, she continued to act, landing even larger roles in films like The Bohemian Girl, which would unfortunately be her last big role. Her career as a comedian, actress, and businesswoman were cut short on December 16th, 1935, when she was found dead in her convertible Lincoln by her maid, May Whitehead, while it was parked in Jewel Carmen's garage. Now, Jewel is the ex-wife of Roland West, who again was Thelma's producer and her business partner. Whitehead said, quote, she was slumped in the front seat of her car, and later she told detectives, just bent over, her head to the left. She also mentioned that there was actually blood around Thelma's nose, and it's important to note that Jewel's house was very close to Thelma's restaurant, actually only about 1 block away, definitely walking distance. Following Thelma being found deceased, her cause of death was ruled as carbon monoxide poisoning, but how and why she got into the car, in that garage, and stayed there is where the mystery lies. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the events that led up to that morning. The police investigation says that she spent the night before at a local restaurant and went to a party which was hosted by Stanley Lipino, who was a famous entertainer at the time. While she was there, she encountered Pasquale DeCiccio, who was her ex-husband. I'm going to call him Pat. And the report says that there was an unpleasant exchange between the two of them. Those around her that night told the police that she was in good spirits even after this took place. And when she wanted to leave the party, her chauffeur, Ernest Peters, took her home. Due to these basic events, the LAPD ruled her death as an accident, and the autopsy surgeons testified that there were no marks anywhere on or in the body that indicate struggle or violence took place. Due to this, a grand jury ruled that her death was an accident, just as the police had said first, but they did want further investigation to be conducted. Then, after a second grand jury found the same conclusion, the Homicide Bureau closed the case. The day after her death, the Los Angeles Times released an article saying, quote, "The officers turned to probable cause of death by foul means. Within the past 3 months, 2 men have been arrested in New York in connection to extortion notes and telephone calls received by Miss Todd demanding $10,000 under penalty of death. But there were no signs of violence at the scene of this death." Unquote. Oddly, it seems open and shut, but we still know about it to this day, and that's because there are lingering conspiracies that there was foul play. Let's jump into these conspiracies now. The first theory is that Thelma took her own life. This theory comes from a few different places. First, she was like many others in Hollywood that are hyper-focused on their appearances. When she first joined Paramount Junior's School of Stars, she was told to watch her weight. She apparently lost 20 pounds and often had this pointed out by interviewers. Once, in an interview with the Massachusetts Girl, she said that Hollywood definitely took some getting used to. She actually said, quote, "At first, when I was making pictures and men hailed me as a sweetheart or honey or came up to me and put their arm around me like they wanted to tell me something, I was insulted. We don't take familiarity from men in New England. I know now that they were just being friendly and that I really appreciate that." And even when she opened her restaurant, she said that this would be financial stability for her so she could get off of the big screen. Not that she didn't love acting, but she wouldn't have to worry about aging or wrinkles or weight or other superficial things in Hollywood. And though her friends say that she was in good spirits the night of the party, even after this intense encounter with her ex-husband, you don't always know what's going on in someone's head. The issue with this theory is brought to light by the Chicago Tribune, who said, quote, "While a grand jury ruled that Todd committed suicide, it was unable to explain her broken nose, the bruises around her throat, and 2 cracked ribs. Apparently, the grand jury thought that Todd had beat herself to death." Unquote. Now, if you're wondering what happened to the autopsy report citing that there were no injuries, well, me too. Additionally, she and Roland West had a restaurant together, and though it was well known and loved, financially it wasn't doing great, mostly because their suppliers were mob related and wanted to raise prices. Her own mother believes that this got to her and the investigation is just chalked up to cheap politicians trying to get jobs. The second theory involves her ex-husband, Pasquale DeCiccio, whom she had the encounter with the night before her death. He was a producer and an agent, and the two eloped in 1932. Their marriage only lasted for about 2 years, and many say that they argued very often. They also note that it was likely fueled by alcohol. Thelma was the one who wanted to leave him, and she did this the same year she opened her restaurant with Roland West. There may be more bad blood than people think. Thelma opened her restaurant. As I said, Roland West, her business partner, was also her former lover. This could not have pleased Pasquale, I'm sure. The night before she was found dead, she showed up to the party and saw him there with a new woman. According to All Things Interesting, Thelma was furious about this. The host of the party later said that Pat specifically asked to be seated next to Thelma, and he was closely involved with Lucky Luciano, who, as we know, is an infamous mobster. Lucky is actually the subject of the third theory. Thelma was introduced to him by her husband, Pat. After their brief introduction, the two had an affair, and it's said that he even provided her with amphetamines to help keep her weight down. And not surprisingly, the two had a horrible relationship. It's believed that Lucky beat her and got her hooked on the drugs he was providing. Also, Thelma told Lucky that he could open a casino in her restaurant, but then she took back her promise. She told him that she would only allow a mobster to infiltrate her restaurant over her dead body, and he responded with, "That can be arranged." During the time of her death, Lucky was in town. And though Lucky was a mobster with many connections, he was also a blip in Thelma's timeline. The final theory really revolves around someone who was there from the start of her career. Roland West, who was her producer, business partner, and former lover, was also the one whose property she was found dead on. He told the newspaper that he locked Thelma out and believes she took shelter from the cold in her car, and that is how she passed away. The side note here is while the two were romantically involved, he was still married. And though people say his wife was okay with the relationship, I'm sure there could have been other motives. Roland said he locked her out of the home after the party because he told her to be there by 2 a.m. And when 2:30 rolled around and she still wasn't there, he got upset. When she came to the house and realized that no one was going to let her in, she climbed over 270 steps to get to their garage and got in her car. To stay warm, she started the motor, and this is how she got carbon monoxide poisoning. But there are issues with this theory. First, when she was found, the car was not running, even though there was still fuel in the tank. Witnesses say the coroner was wrong, and that she had called friends that night from her phone while she was at the house. Roland West's ex-wife said that she saw Thelma in the car with a man that night. There are conflicting autopsy reports that say while she had carbon monoxide in her blood, she was likely intoxicated. There was also damage found around her throat, which can indicate someone forcing an object into her mouth. And this is reminiscent of a time that she had told Lucky she wanted to stop drinking to help control her weight, and he had shoved a champagne bottle into her mouth to get her drunk. But on Roland's deathbed, he confessed that he knew more about her death than he had let on. Thelma did have a service in Los Angeles, and her body was cremated. Her ashes would later be placed in her mother's casket and buried in Massachusetts in 1969. It was very hard for the community to mourn her death with all of this uncertainty as to why it happened or by whom. Today, we remember a woman who was business savvy, an early star in Hollywood, and a trendsetter. That's it for this episode. Let me know what you think really happened to Thelma Todd. If you have a case you want covered, DM me on Instagram at MeganTheMorningPodcast, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with another Hollywood true crime case.